The ground is still damp from the slight morning chill. Though still early, 37-year-old Grenville Mellen Dodge has been awake for some time now. Hundreds of miles from Laramie, spring saw the first Memorial Day celebrated at Arlington Cemetery after the Civil War left over 750,000 dead. Now, it is summer, and the fate of an industry, a legacy, and a vision for the future hangs in the balance between two men, Thomas C. Durant, Vice President of the Union Pacific Railroad, and his chief engineer, Grenville M. Dodge. Dodge is irate. He has dedicated much of his life to building the Transcontinental Railroad. He has been away from his family for so long that his wife, Ruth Ann, asks,
"How can you like being gone so much and having so many times to fight with men like Durant?"
Durant, who has continuously altered Dodge's surveys in order to add more miles to the railway, cheating the government out of millions of dollars and jeopardizing the project as a whole. Dodge knows that in order to accomplish this engineering feat and secure his future, the railroad must be finished before the winter shutdown of 1869. He also knows that Durant is ruthless and time is running short. On a bright spring day in April, New Englanders Sylvanus and Julia Dodge welcomed Grenville Mellen Dodge into the world. Though they faced many a struggle from the start, Grenville was soon joined by brother Nathan Phillips in 1837 and sister Julia in 1843. At 14 years old, while working on the nearby Landers family farm, he was inspired by the older, charismatic Frederick Landers to become a civil engineer and pursue a military education. Dodge enrolled in Norwich University in 1848, where he focused on math, grammar, logic, military science, and civil engineering. And at a time when intense divisions over slavery in the United States were reaching a fever pitch, Dodge joined in shouting down a fugitive slave who had been speaking at the university.
He sounded too much like his godforsaken party of abolitionists.
Dodge graduated from Norwich University in 1851 and moved to Peru, Illinois, chasing the promise of employment and adventure. Upon reaching Peru, he witnessed men dragging a dead body from the river. Few seemed to care.
I wondered to myself what kind of a country I had struck that no one took any interest in a dead man.
Welcome to the West. In this wild and opportunistic place, Dodge thrived. He surveyed and plotted land for numerous national railroads, and he hitched his fate to the engine of American expansionism. On November 23, 1853, he first laid eyes on Council Bluffs. Though it was just a small hamlet, Dodge saw a dynamic future, a gateway to possibility, and an essential role for himself within it. But Council Bluffs' potential was not the only thing occupying his thoughts. While in Peru, Illinois, Dodge had become acquainted with a beautiful, refined, and spirited young woman named Ruth Ann Brown. As adept with quoting literature as she was handling a gun and riding a horse, she quickly captured Dodge's attention. At 22 years old, he and Ruth Ann married. A unique banjo clock was one of the more notable gifts that marked the beginning of their life together. That same year, an economic panic set in, which crippled funding for railroads. Ever adaptable, Dodge decided to try his luck at homesteading. He set up a cabin near the Elkhorn River and then convinced his whole family to join him. In the oppressive heat of July, Ruth Ann gave birth to their first child, a daughter named Letty. Yet even during homesteading, Dodge never took his sights off the railroad. The Native Americans in the area nicknamed him Long Eye, or Hawkeye, for his surveying tools and sharpshooting. As settlers who believed in manifest destiny flooded into lands originally belonging to native tribes, tensions boiled over. After several hostile encounters, Dodge closed the book on homesteading and moved his family to Omaha. Baldwin, Dodge and Company Banking and Real Estate opened at a time when new businesses sprung up like daisies. With his brother Nathan as his business partner and confidant, Dodge began investing in local land along the proposed path for the Transcontinental Railroad. Through economic depression, a bout of snow blindness, and a corruption scandal that threatened to sink his fledgling business, Dodge persevered. And as Council Bluffs continued to grow, so too did his family. They welcomed their daughter Eleanor in December 1858. In August of 1859, Abraham Lincoln traveled to Council Bluffs. While in town, he sought someone to speak with about the Transcontinental Railroad. At 28 years old, Dodge sat down with Lincoln at the Pacific Hotel on its wide front porch, where they discussed ideas and logistics for 2 hours. Dodge did most of the talking.
Mr. Lincoln sat down beside me, and by his kindly ways soon drew from me all I knew of the country west and the results of my reconnaissance. As the saying is, he completely shelled my woods.
At the end of the meeting, a bond had been formed and a shared vision born.
Not one, but many railroads will someday center here.
Dodge supported Lincoln's bid for president as part of Iowa's delegation and attended his inauguration in March 1861.
Old Abe delivered the greatest speech of the age. It is backbone all over.
One of the key Republican Party policies? Plans for the Transcontinental Railroad. But just as the work was meant to begin in earnest, the South Carolina militia attacked Fort Sumter, a country on the edge, charged headlong into civil war. Not long after Arkansas and Tennessee seceded from the Union, Grenville Dodge was appointed colonel of the 4th Iowa Volunteer Infantry, fighting for the Union.
I go into this war on principle, even though pecuniarily it will ruin me.
Later that year, as Baldwin, Dodge and Company went bankrupt, he pushed for a promotion. His engineering skills proved highly valuable, and his dedication to toiling in the mud alongside his men inspired a deep sense of loyalty.
I have a very fine regiment. I know I can lead them through a hot place, and they will follow me until the last man drops.
On March 7th, at the Battle of Pea Ridge in Arkansas, Dodge's brigade faced a fierce and bloody battle against a superior Confederate force. They were outnumbered 3-1. As he would tell the story, 3 horses were shot out from under him in the course of the fighting. Ultimately, Dodge's brigade prevailed. The Battle of Pea Ridge became legendary. Dodge was promoted to brigadier general for heroism a few months before Lincoln signed the Pacific Railway Act into law. Throughout this time, Dodge had also been leading a different sort of charge, one without the public accolades. Yet it was this quiet battlefield that arguably changed the tide of the conflict. Dodge was engaged in espionage. Like the men he fought alongside in battle, those who were part of Dodge's carefully tailored spy ring were fiercely loyal and effective. Dodge returned their loyalty. Even after the Civil War, he refused to divulge the names of his agents. In March of 1862, intelligence from Dodge's spies saved the Army of the Southwest from annihilation. A year later, they helped Union General Ulysses S. Grant capture Vicksburg, a victory that split the Confederacy in half. In a move that was a far cry from Dodge's university days, he also organized a black regiment, arming freed slaves and recruiting several to spy on Confederates. In response, the South called for Dodge's immediate execution if captured. During the course of the war, he had sparse opportunity to see his family. Ruth Ann struggled with a separation from Ocean, as she called her husband.
It is pretty hard to have families separated. No doubt the spring campaign will commence very early and all will be march away. I only wish Ocean would march northward instead of southward.
In August of 1864, while examining the front line in Atlanta, Dodge was shot in the head. Rumors circulated that he had been killed.
We have just gotten word of GM being dangerously wounded, and we are feeling very sad. I have been in great fear he would get hit, knowing he was not naturally cautious.
Remarkably, Dodge survived. The bullet left him with a severe concussion that caused temporary derangement of his brain and nervous system. Ruth Ann rushed to his side. One day, 6-year-old Ella decided to watch the physician change the dressing on her father's head.
All at once, she fell over me in a dead faint. After that, I kept children out of the operating room.
The days and weeks passed. The air grew colder, and war continued to bloody the nation. In November 1864, Dodge had an audience with President Lincoln and the White House, where they discussed the gospel of peace and emancipation. Meanwhile, Charles Darwin was awarded the British Royal Society's highest honor for achievement in science. Union General Sherman marched from Atlanta to Savannah. And Colonel John Chivington led the slaughter of over 200 peaceful Cheyenne and Arapaho men, women, and children at Sand Creek, Colorado. In time, Dodge regained his strength and set out to achieve his two primary goals: win the war and build the railroad. To this end, he and his soldiers waged war on Native Americans, offering those he captured as forced labor for his future employer, Union Pacific.
It is impossible to keep civilization from encroaching upon their country. We've got to clean the Indian out or give up. The government may take its choice.
April 1865 saw the end of the Civil War at Appomattox Courthouse. The tenor of victory was short-lived, however, as President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated.
It is one of the greatest calamities for this or any other nation. He represented everything that makes a cause worth dying for. It is the saddest day of my life.
With the war over, Dodge turned back to his first love, the railroad. That year, his team laid 247 miles of railroad track. His youngest daughter, Anne, was born, and he was elected to Congress as a Republican in Iowa's 5th District. In March of 1867, when Nebraska became the 37th state and the U.S. purchased Alaska from Russia, Grenville Dodge took his seat in Congress. He hated it.
The Capitol is an infernal place, and I am sick to death of it.
It was his first day. Not surprisingly, he threw himself into his railroad work. In the summer of 1867, he established Cheyenne, Wyoming, and his team went on to travel across the West. They laid 487 miles of track in Black Hills and crossed Sherman Summit at 8,212 feet, the highest point of any railroad on the planet. Despite his distaste of Congress, he showed up to support the 15th Amendment, which established the right of black males to vote. By this time, Grenville and Ruth Ann Dodge had grown accustomed to the separation from their family, to the long days and grueling pace of what he considered progress. He also saw his plans start to unravel. In the summer of 1868, Dodge was summoned to Laramie to meet with his mercurial and corrupt boss. Durant planned to kick Dodge off the project to protect his money-making scheme. Dodge, however, had a plan. The fateful day arrives. Durant waits on his chief engineer at Fort Sanders. But when Dodge shows up for their meeting, he is not alone. He enters the negotiation flanked by his friends, legendary Civil War generals Ulysses S. Grant, William Tecumseh Sherman, and Philip Sheridan, as well as Major Generals Christopher Augur and Francis Preston Blair, the Democratic vice presidential candidate. Durant's coarse methods of intimidation are no match for the power of Dodge's contingent. Dodge has brought a cannon to a gunfight. Before the day is done, Dodge is given full authority on the routes for the Union Pacific Railroad. Finally, on May 10, 1869, after a furious, back-breaking effort, the Union Pacific and Central Pacific Railroads are joined with golden spikes at Promontory Point. At 38 years old, Grenville Mellen Dodge stands proudly and surveys what he considers the greatest achievement of his life. In his mind, he has helped unite the country once again. To be a titan in the Gilded Age is to know privilege upon privilege. Dodge becomes the chief engineer for the Texas Pacific Railway, and the Dodges split time between Texas, their dream house in Iowa, and New York. He travels the country in the comfort of a Pullman car with his trusted porter, July Miles. Even when the Credit Mobilier scandal comes to light, implicating Dodge, Durant, and other stockholders in corruption and ethics violations, Dodge nimbly avoids prosecution. He is often in the company of his friends Ulysses S. Grant, Theodore Roosevelt, and Andrew Carnegie, and consults on railways around the world: France, Italy, Switzerland, India, Cuba, Mexico, and Russia. He lives to see Council Bluffs grow into the thriving railway hub that Lincoln predicted it would be. And he watches the South maintain and institutionalize racial inequalities through Reconstruction. When Dodge returns to Council Bluffs permanently in 1907, he turns his attention to philanthropy, focusing on animal welfare and Civil War veterans. He is often seen walking to and from his office with a cat on his shoulder. Time passes. Sometimes it is just Dodge and his now divorced daughter Letty at the grand dining room table. In 1911, Dodge's little brother Nathan dies. Shortly thereafter, illness comes for him. He and Ruth Ann make an effort to spend more time together.
It is sweet to see mother and father united again and so happy together.
When Grenville Mellen Dodge dies on January 3, 1916, Ruth Ann is too unwell to attend his funeral. It is a grand event. He is mourned by his family, his community, the men with whom he served, and a country. Months later, Ruth Ann succumbs to her illness. A statue of a black angel stands as a reminder of her life and last moments. Ultimately, Dodge has surveyed or constructed 16 railroads in 6 countries, totaling over 63,000 miles of track. It is enough to circle the earth almost 3 times over. In Dodge's will, he provides for his fellow veterans and their children, as well as the disadvantaged in his beloved home of Council Bluffs. A titan in his time, the echoes of his impact continue today. He leaves behind a legacy that is both enduring and complicated, a tide in an ocean of time, much like the man himself.
Are you ready to enter a time capsule? Join us in these storied walls filled with historical significance and secrets. Perhaps you'll be drawn to Dodge's original books or the curve of his favorite chair. Maybe it's the Civil War mementos or the railroads that capture your imagination. Or maybe it's all about the details. We invite you to explore this living history. We know you'll have many questions, and we can't wait to answer them. Welcome to the historic General Dodge House.
Ain't that inspiring? Hurrah, hurrah, we'll join the Jubilee, and that's going some for the Yankees by gum. Red, white, and blue, hats off to you. Honest, you're a grand old flag. You're a grand old flag, though you're torn to a rag, and forever in peace may you wave. You're the emblem of the land I love, the home of the free and the brave. Every heart beats true under red, white, and blue, where there's never a boast or brag. But should old acquaintance be forgot, keep your eye on the grand old flag. You're a grand old flag, though you're torn to a rag, and forever in peace may you wave. You're the emblem of the land I love, the home of the free and the brave. Every heart beats true under red, white, and blue, where there's never a boast or brag. But should old acquaintance be forgot, keep your eye on the